You surely know the story of the crucifixion of Jesus, that dramatic event in which nails crossed his hands, where a crown of thorns was pressed on his head and where an indescribable suffering marked his last hours. But what would you think if I told you that a crucial detail of this episode has been hidden in most Bibles? An element so powerful and extraordinary that only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved its memory. A revelation that involves two of the most powerful angels ever mentioned, Michael and Uriel, performing an unimaginable act with the same blood of Christ. What you are about to discover could profoundly transform your perception of the crucifixion. This event, already impregnated with mystery and symbolism, hides a secret that remains buried in ancient traditions. A secret that directly connects the cross of Christ with a sacred African land, with a divine design that few people know. If you have never heard of him, prepare for a revelation that could change your vision of Christian history. The Golgotha, the scene of the crucifixion, was submerged in an atmosphere full of pain and tension. The scene was both tragic and solemn. The Roman soldiers, experienced in executions, carried out their dark work with cold indifference, while a divided crowd remained there, oscillating between sincere tears and cruel mockery. Only Jesus, suspended between heaven and earth, embodied the weight of the sacrifice. His body, marked by torture, was a vision of suffering, each movement a torture. The Gospels record with precision the smallest details of this moment: the hammered nails, the unbearable pain, the words of contempt and mockery that sprang from the crowd. But what these stories do not explicitly mention is an event of divine meaning that took place that day, before the eyes of beings of whom few people have ever spoken. As the evening advanced and the breath of Jesus faded, the Roman soldiers decided to speed up the death of the crucified, a common practice to end agony more quickly. They generally broke the legs of the condemned, thus depriving them of the slightest support and preventing them from breathing. However, when they approached Jesus, they discovered that he was already dead. To make sure, one of the soldiers grabbed a spear and nailed it to his side. The Gospel of John records this moment in a surprising way. Immediately, blood and water sprang from the wound. But what no one saw that day was that at that precise moment, a celestial presence was there, invisible to the eyes of men, but acting in the shadow of divine destiny. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has been transmitting for centuries a tradition that speaks of the intervention of angels at this crucial moment. Among them was Uriel, one of the most enigmatic archangels of the Christian tradition. His name, although practically unknown in Western Bibles, however appears in the ancient texts preserved in Ethiopia, where its importance is indisputable. Unlike Miguel and Gabriel, who occupy a central place in canonical writings, Uriel has been excluded from the texts recognized by the Catholic Church and the Protestant branches. However, in Oriental traditions, his role has never been forgotten. That day, when the divine blood flowed over the wood of the cross, Uriel was not alone. Miguel, the archangel fighter, the great celestial protector, was also present. But why were those angels there? Why witness this tragic event, this scene of suffering? According to the tradition preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, their role was not limited to being witnesses. They had a specific mission. The ancient writings relate an extraordinary event. Uriel, provided with a sacred chalice, extended his wings and carefully collected the blood that flowed from the wound of Christ. Each drop was precious because it was not only human blood, it was the blood of the Son of God, the price of the salvation of the world. But what happened next is beyond imagination. After collecting the divine blood, Uriel and Michel received a celestial order. They had to transport this chalice to a specific place. This destination was none other than Ethiopia. This link between the sacrifice of Christ and this African land is one of the deepest mysteries of Christianity. Few people are aware of it, and however, this tradition is in the heart of Ethiopian faith. According to this account, the blood of Christ, collected by the angels, was not only preserved, but was spilled over the earth itself, sanctifying Ethiopia in a unique way. Unlike other nations that received Christianity centuries later through conversions and missionaries, Ethiopia has a special relationship with this faith. She did not adopt it simply, but it was chosen from the beginning to be a blessed land. The drops of blood spilled by Uriel and Michel marked this land as a sacred land. What is even more fascinating is that this belief continues today. In many Ethiopian Orthodox churches, Uriel's representations holding a chalice full of red liquid remember this tradition. This chalice is not a simple symbolic image. It is the tangible memory of the divine role that Ethiopia played in the history of salvation. But why has this story been erased from the canonical texts of most Christians? Why has only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved its memory? The answer lies in the history of the canonization of the scriptures. In the early centuries of Christianity, many texts were examined and judged to determine which would become part of the official Bible. The criteria included their connection with the apostles, their dissemination among Christian communities, and their conformity with accepted theology. The leaders of the Western Church rejected the writings that mentioned Uriel, such as the Book of Enoch and Esdras. But in Ethiopian tradition, they were never forgotten. They continued to be transmitted, being preserved from generation to generation, forming the foundation of a Christianity rich in mysteries and deeply rooted in the supernatural events of the crucifixion. Thus, beyond the known stories, another story emerges, a story that unites the sacrifice of Christ to an African land, to a tradition preserved in secret, and to the silent presence of angels fulfilling a divine mission. A story that, once revealed, gives a new dimension to one of the most sacred moments of Christian faith. Uriel's presence at this decisive moment reinforces the idea that the sacrifice of Christ largely transcends the traditional interpretation that is given to it. It was not only an act of redemption for humanity, but an event with much wider repercussions, which established an indelible link between the crucifixion and a land that would become one of the oldest cradles of Christianity. For Ethiopian faith, this story is not a simple spiritual allegory, but a truth deeply rooted in the very identity of the country, where, according to tradition, the blood of Christ was collected by the angels, monasteries and churches were erected, which became living shrines of this sacred memory. Each stone, each prayer, each ritual recalls the idea that this land bears the divine footprint of this foundational event. For Ethiopian Christians, communion is not limited to a symbolic ritual. It is a direct and tangible connection with the sacrifice of Christ. They believe that their soil has received a unique blessing, sanctified by the blood of the Savior, which gives their faith a singular intensity. This conviction gives their religious practice a depth that few Christian traditions share with such fervor. But this tradition raises a fascinating question. If Uriel played such an essential role in the crucifixion, to what extent his influence and intervention really extends in other episodes of sacred history? Could the fact that his name has been erased from most biblical versions mean that certain truths have been deliberately darkened over the centuries? If Uriel and Michel were important protagonists of this event, why was this dimension of the history of Christ hidden from the eyes of most believers? To understand this omission, we must go back to the early centuries of Christianity, a time when the leaders of the church gave shape to the official body of the scriptures. They determined that texts deserved to be included in the Bible and which should be excluded. However, the name Uriel appears in several ancient texts rejected from the official canon, especially in the Book of Enoch and the fourth book of Esdras. In these writings, Uriel is not limited to the role of celestial observer. He is a primordial archangel, bearer of divine light and guardian of the deepest mysteries. He is not a mere messenger, but a revealer of celestial secrets intended to illuminate humanity. However, over time his image was eclipsed by the Western Christian tradition. Unlike Michael, the celestial warrior, and Gabriel, the herald of divine plans, Uriel embodies a more esoteric dimension. It is the bridge between hidden divine knowledge and human understanding. This characteristic may have led the ecclesiastical authorities to reduce importance to its importance, or even to completely erase it from the dominant narratives. Why? Because certain teachings attributed to Uriel carried within them truths susceptible to making them stumble, established dogmas. It was associated with deep wisdom, sometimes perceived as dangerous for those who were not prepared to understand all its meaning. The texts in which he appears often reveal mysteries about the destiny of humanity, the final judgment and the interaction between the spiritual world and the earthly world. While the Western Christian was erasing him from his official theology, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church never stopped venerating his figure. For her, Uriel is still an essential archangel, who plays a primordial role in the execution of the divine plan. That is why the Ethiopian tradition has retained its participation in the crucifixion of Christ, although this truth has been lost elsewhere. According to his accounts, Uriel and Miguel were not mere witnesses of Calvary. They were active agents who intervened directly in the realization of the divine plan. Thus, when the blood of Christ springs from his transgressed side, Uriel, faithful to his mission, acts without delay. Not only did he collect the blood in a divine chalice, but he played an essential role in his destiny. And here is a fascinating detail: this chalice was not a simple sacred glass. It was an object of immeasurable spiritual power, designed to sanctify and preserve the blood of the Son of God, ensuring its purity through the centuries. According to the Ethiopian tradition, this chalice was removed from the view of the Western world, directly to Ethiopia, where it would have been carefully guarded for centuries. But why precisely this land of Africa? Why would this country be chosen, and not another, to house such a sacred artifact? The answer may be in the deep and ancient connection of Ethiopia with Christianity. Unlike other nations that discovered the Christian faith through missionaries or through conversion of their leaders, Ethiopia was connected to this spirituality long before religion was officially established there. Historical and biblical evidence indicates that Ethiopia was in contact with the traditions of Judaism and, later, with the teachings of Christianity already in the times of the Old Testament. The famous Queen of Sheba, mentioned in the scriptures, traveled to Jerusalem to meet King Solomon. According to the Ethiopian tradition, from this union a royal lineage was born that lasted for centuries, thus perpetuating a divine connection between Jerusalem and Ethiopia. The Christian history itself mentions Ethiopia in its beginnings. One of the first conversions to Christianity, recounted in the Gospels, was a high Ethiopian dignitary, servant of Queen Candace, baptized by the Apostle Philip. This event, described in the Book of Acts of the Apostles, testifies to the importance of Ethiopia in the dissemination of Christianity from the early times. Therefore, it is possible that God chose this land to receive and protect the blood of Christ. If this tradition is true, it would mean that Ethiopia has a unique and direct connection with the sacrifice of Jesus, long before many other nations embraced Christianity through historical and political processes. But the story does not end there. What was of this sacred caliph? Persistent rumors suggest that he was hidden in one of the oldest monasteries in Ethiopia, protected by generations of monks who dedicated their lives to his preservation. Some say that he still lies in the shadows, invisible to the world, waiting for the moment when his revelation is considered appropriate. This legend resonates with another ancient belief, deeply rooted in the Ethiopian tradition: the location of the Ark of the Covenant. According to this tradition, the Ark, which contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments, was transported to Ethiopia millennia ago and is still preserved in the Church of St. Mary of Shaun, in Aksum. If these stories are true, then Ethiopia would not only be a country with a fascinating religious past, but also one of the most sacred places in Christianity, home of two of the most powerful and mysterious artifacts of faith. What makes this story even more intriguing are the iconographic representations present in the Ethiopian churches. Many paintings and icons show Archangel Uriel holding this sacred caliph. In some representations, his wings are marked with red spots, as if they had been bathed in the blood of Christ. These surprising images reinforce the belief that Ethiopia was sanctified directly by God. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition affirms that the presence of Uriel and Michael at the crucifixion was not a simple divine testimony, but a mission of much greater magnitude. They were there not only to collect the blood of the Savior, but also to ensure that this sacrifice was not seen as a mere historical event. They made it an act with cosmic repercussions, directly influencing the spiritual order of the world. If this version of the events is authentic, why has most Christian traditions darkened it? The answer could be in the evolution of religious dogma. Over time, the Western Church has shaped a narrative coherent with its dominant theology, discarding certain texts considered too esoteric or too complex. Many writings, considered too mysterious or divergent, were removed from the official versions of the scriptures, leaving only those passages corresponding to established doctrines. However, the truth cannot be completely erased. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has worked to preserve this history over the centuries, ensuring that future generations never forget the role of Uriel and Michael in the crucifixion. If these accounts are accurate, then it means that the story of Christ is much broader than what they have taught us. The secrets are still buried, and the crucifixion of Jesus was not just a moment of suffering, but a cosmic event whose ramifications continue to this day. And that brings us to one last mystery. There is a detail about the crucifixion that most believers have never noticed. A revelation that could completely transform the way we understand the last words of Christ on the cross. You've probably heard these words before, but do you know what they really mean? Behind this final declaration of Christ is a little-known secret, a deep meaning that most people still do not know. Without this key, we lose the most essential element of what really happened that day. If you are ready to discover this hidden truth, prepare for an even more surprising revelation.